The Great Hall of the Galactic Peace Council had never seen such panic. 7 different alien species sat around the crystal table, their usual calm shattered by the latest reports from the outer rim. Veltar, the leader of the ethereal Zephyrians, floated above his chair with his blue skin glowing dim with worry. His gill slits fluttered rapidly as he spoke. "The Krex Empire has taken another 12 worlds this month," he said, his voice like wind through leaves. "The Mentari colonies are completely gone. We estimate 4 billion beings have been enslaved or killed." Around the table, other council members shared the same helpless expression. The Mentari representative, Scholar Quindal, had tears streaming down his gray face. His people were known across the galaxy for their libraries and schools. Now their worlds burned while Krex forces stripped away everything valuable. "Our peacekeepers cannot stop them," admitted council member Jex Era of the plant-like Verdani. "The Krex laugh at our meditation specialists. They destroy our harmony ships before we can even begin diplomatic talks." For 300 years, the Galactic Peace Council had kept order through understanding and gentle guidance. When conflicts arose, they sent counselors and meditation experts to help different species find common ground. Violence was almost unknown among civilized worlds. Most problems could be solved with patience and kind words. But the Krex Empire was different. They came from the dark spaces between star systems, a warrior race that had somehow developed faster than light travel. They did not want to talk or find peaceful solutions. They wanted planets, resources, and slaves. Their massive war fleets destroyed everything that stood in their way. "We need help from someone who understands conflict," said Veltar. "But who?" "Every civilized species in our records practices nonviolence." The Council's chief researcher, a floating crystal being named Lumera, pulsed with sudden light. "Wait, there is one species we discovered recently. They call themselves humans, from a planet designated Earth. Our deep space scanners found them 6 months ago." She activated a holographic display, showing a small blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. "Initial scans suggest they have extensive experience with something they call peacekeeping operations. They seem to specialize in what their language calls conflict resolution." The other council members leaned forward with interest. Veltar's gills stopped their rapid fluttering. "Tell us more about these humans." "They appear to have a large organization called the United Nations that handles disputes between different groups on their planet," Lum Era continued. "They have forces specifically designed for peacekeeping missions. Their communications mention bringing stability to troubled regions and protecting civilian populations." Scholar Quindal wiped his tears away. "They sound perfect. Exactly what we need." "There is one concern," Lum Era admitted. "Their planet appears to be what our scientists classify as a death world. High gravity, extreme weather, dangerous animal life. But the humans seem peaceful despite this harsh environment. Their peacekeepers work to prevent violence, not create it." The council voted quickly. They had no other options. The Krex Empire grew stronger every day, and their own gentle methods had failed completely. If these humans truly specialized in peacekeeping, they might be the galaxy's only hope. Veltar authorized the message personally. The Council's best translators worked for hours to craft a plea that would make their desperate situation clear while remaining respectful. They asked for peaceful intervention specialists to help restore harmony in what they politely called a minor territorial dispute. The message traveled across space at faster-than-light speeds, racing toward the small yellow star where humanity lived. The council members could only wait and hope that these mysterious peacekeepers would answer their call. Far away in Earth's solar system, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U.S. Guardian, watching the stars through the main viewer. His ship was one of Earth's newest destroyers, designed for long patrol missions in the outer system. Morrison was a veteran of 3 different peacekeeping operations, including the difficult mission to stabilize the Mars colonies during their independence crisis. Communications Officer Chen worked to establish contact with the alien vessel. "They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies, Captain. very peaceful sounding music, and what appears to be poetry about universal harmony. Morrison shook his head. These aliens were definitely different from anything in human history. Open a channel, Danny. Let's see what they want. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of the alien ship. Morrison and his bridge crew tried not to stare at their first sight of extraterrestrial life. The being on screen was tall and thin with blue skin that seemed to glow from within. It had large eyes like black pools and gill slits on its neck that opened and closed rhythmically. "Greetings, humans," the alien said in a voice like wind chimes. "I am Silandra of the Zephyrian people, speaking for the Galactic Peace Council. We are so grateful that you answered our call for help." Morrison straightened his uniform and tried to look professional. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Nations Ship Guardian. We received your message about a territorial dispute that needs peacekeeping intervention." Silandra's gills fluttered faster. "Yes, the situation has become quite disturbing to our inner peace. The Kreks have been causing tremendous disharmony across several star systems. We hope your peacekeeping specialists can help restore balance." "Tell me about these Kreks," Morrison said. "What kind of weapons are they using? How many soldiers? What's their command structure?" The alien looked confused by the questions. "Weapons? I am not familiar with this concept. The Kreks are very aggressive and loud. They disturb the natural harmony of the worlds they visit. We have tried sending meditation specialists and harmony counselors, but the Kreks ignore them." Hayes leaned over to Morrison and whispered, "Sir, I don't think she understands military terminology." Morrison tried a different approach. "How many Kreks are there? What kind of ships do they have?" "Many," Silandra replied unhelpfully. "Their ships are large and make terrible noise. They paint them with frightening colors and symbols, very upsetting to sensitive beings." Engineer Kate Sullivan, monitoring the conversation from her station, rolled her eyes. "These aliens seem to have no concept of warfare beyond finding it unpleasant." "Perhaps it would be better if you showed us the situation directly," Morrison suggested. "We can assess the problem and determine the best peacekeeping approach." Silandra's entire body brightened with relief. "Oh yes, that would be wonderful. Please follow our ship to the Andra system. That is where the Kreks have been most recently causing disturbances." The journey to Andros took 2 days through hyperspace. During the trip, Morrison tried repeatedly to get useful intelligence from Silandra, but the conversations only became more frustrating. When he asked about Krek's military capabilities, she described them as very disturbing to one's spiritual balance. When he asked about casualties, she talked about disrupted harmony fields. Gunnery Sergeant Mendez, preparing his Marines for what he assumed would be a police action, found the aliens' descriptions useless for tactical planning. "Captain, I can't plan an operation based on reports that the enemy is spiritually loud and aesthetically unpleasant." Morrison was beginning to suspect that these peaceful aliens had never experienced real warfare. Their entire civilization seemed built around meditation and harmony. They'd probably just needed help dealing with some unruly colonists or pirates. When the human task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andros system, everything changed in an instant. "Holy hell," whispered Hayes, staring at her tactical display. The system was a nightmare. 3 planets burned with the light of massive fires visible even from space. Huge alien ships, each one the size of a small moon, orbited the worlds like mechanical vultures. The ships were painted in blood red and black, covered with spikes and weapon turrets. They looked like they had been designed by someone who wanted to terrify enemies before destroying them. "Captain," reported Chen, his voice shaking, "I'm reading thousands of smaller ships moving between the planets. And sir, the energy signatures from those big ships are off the charts." Morrison felt ice in his stomach as he realized what they were facing. This was not a police action or a border dispute between civilized neighbors. This was full-scale warfare by what appeared to be a genocidal empire. "Get me a full tactical analysis," he ordered Hayes. "I want to know exactly what we're looking at." "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from outside the solar system. reported Communications Officer Danny Chen. "It's on a frequency we've never seen before, and it's definitely not from any Earth source." Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. First contact with alien life was something humanity had dreamed about for centuries. "Put it on screen, Danny." The bridge filled with strange, melodic sounds that gradually resolved into words as the ship's computer worked to translate the message. The voice was soft and musical, nothing like what Morrison had expected from aliens. "Greetings, humans of Earth. We are the Galactic Peace Council, representing 7 civilized species. We face a crisis that threatens peaceful worlds across our region of space. We have learned that your people specialize in peacekeeping operations and conflict resolution. We humbly request your assistance in restoring harmony to worlds affected by a minor territorial dispute." Morrison looked at his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes. She raised an eyebrow and shrugged. After years of working together, they could communicate without words. This sounded like the kind of mission they had trained for their entire careers. "The transmission includes coordinates for a meeting point about 40 light-years from here," Chen continued. "They're asking for a diplomatic meeting to discuss the situation." Morrison made his decision quickly. "Contact Fleet Command. Tell them we need authorization for a first contact mission, and get me the files on our peacekeeping protocols." Within hours, orders came back from Earth. Morrison would lead a small task force to investigate this request for help. Along with the Guardian, he would take 2 more destroyers and a support ship. His crew included some of Earth's most experienced peacekeepers, Hayes as his tactical officer, Marine Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Mendez, and Engineer Kate Sullivan. As the human ships prepared for their journey to the meeting coordinates, Morrison studied everything they knew about peacekeeping missions. His experience included separating warring factions, protecting refugees, and maintaining order in unstable regions. The alien message mentioned a territorial dispute, which sounded like the kind of problem UN forces had handled many times on Earth and in the colonies. "What do you think we're walking into?" Hayes asked, as they reviewed mission plans. Morrison looked at the star charts showing their destination. Probably some kind of border conflict. Maybe 2 alien groups fighting over mining rights or colony worlds. Standard stuff, just with aliens instead of humans. "At least they asked for help instead of shooting first," commented Sergeant Mendez from his position near the communication station. "Shows they want a peaceful solution." The human task force jumped to faster than light speed, heading toward their meeting with the Galactic Peace Council. Morrison felt confident about the mission. His people were professionals with years of experience in keeping the peace. How hard could it be to help some aliens sort out their problems? Meanwhile, back at the council chambers, Veltar and his fellow leaders waited anxiously for the humans to arrive. Their scouts reported that the Krex Empire had begun moving toward the core worlds, including the council's home systems. Time was running out. "Do you think these humans can really help us?" asked Scholar Quindle. Veltar's gills fluttered with hope. "They must. They are our only chance to save what remains of civilization in this sector." None of them could imagine what was actually heading their way. They had asked for peacekeepers and mediators, beings like themselves who solved problems with patience and understanding. Instead, they were about to meet representatives of a species that had spent its entire history learning to fight and survive on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. The meeting between humans and the Galactic Peace Council would change everything, though not in the way anyone expected. The meeting between humans and aliens did not go as anyone expected. When the human task force dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the coordinates, Captain Morrison stared at his screen in amazement. The alien ship waiting for them looked like a giant flower made of crystal and light. It had no visible weapons, no armor plating, and seemed to glow with its own soft radiance. "That's their ship?" asked Lieutenant Commander Hayes from her position at the tactical station. "It looks like a piece of art, not a spacecraft." "The situation is clear," Morrison began, showing holographic displays of the Krex forces. We're outnumbered 100-1, and each of their big ships outguns our entire task force. But we're not going home while people are being slaughtered down there. Lieutenant Commander Hayes studied the tactical data. Sir, we could try hit and run attacks. Strike fast at their smaller ships and jump away before they can respond. Engineer Kate Sullivan nodded. Our ships are faster and more maneuverable than theirs. The Krex vessels look powerful, but clumsy. Gunnery Sergeant Mendez looked up from his own tactical pad. Captain, my Marines are ready for whatever you need. We didn't come this far to back down from a fight. Morrison felt proud of his people. They all knew the odds, but none of them suggested abandoning the mission. This was what separated human peacekeepers from the gentle aliens who had called for help. When faced with evil, humans stood and fought. All right, here's what we're going to do, Morrison said. We'll probe their defenses with small attacks. Learn how they fight, what their weaknesses are. Maybe we can't win, but we can make them pay for every world they destroy. The first test came sooner than expected. A patrol of 12 Krex heavy cruisers detected the human task force and moved to investigate. Morrison ordered Commander Nick Foster in the destroyer UNS Relentless to engage them, while the other ships prepared to support. Foster was a veteran of the Jupiter Colony Uprising, where human forces had learned to fight against superior numbers. As the Krex patrol approached, he positioned his ship behind a large asteroid and waited. The lead Krex cruiser, commanded by Subleader Vexmar, opened communications with typical arrogance. Unknown vessels, you will surrender immediately for processing. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. Foster's response was not words but action. The Relentless emerged from behind the asteroid with all weapons firing. Missiles streaked toward the Krex ships, while railguns sent streams of tungsten slugs at near-light speed. The Krex had never faced anything like human weapons before. Their shields were designed to stop the energy beams used by other civilized species. But human weapons were built to kill other humans, and humans had learned to make weapons that could penetrate any defense. The tungsten slugs punched through Krex shields like they were paper. The fusion warheads that followed created miniature suns that melted armor plating designed to withstand particle beams. In the first 30 seconds of combat, 3 Krex cruisers exploded into expanding clouds of debris. Subleader Vexmar stared at his tactical display in shock. No species had ever destroyed Krex vessels so quickly. These small alien ships carried weapons that seemed designed specifically to kill heavily armored warships. All ships, concentrate fire on the lead enemy vessel, Vexmar ordered. Destroy it before it can retreat. But Foster was already moving. The Relentless spun away from the Krex formation, using its superior speed to avoid their return fire. Human ships were built for three-dimensional combat in space, while Krex vessels seemed designed for bombarding planets from orbit. The battle continued for 17 minutes. When it ended, 11 Krex cruisers drifted as wreckage while the 12th limped away with massive damage. The Relentless had taken hits but remained fully operational. Scratch 11 bandits, Foster reported calmly to Morrison. Minor hull damage to sections 4 and 7. Ready for next sortie. The casual tone of Foster's report sent shockwaves through both fleets. The humans treated the destruction of superior enemy forces as routine, while the Krex faced their first major defeat in decades of conquest. Aboard the flagship Bone Crusher, War Master Thakmor received Vexmar's panicked report with growing disbelief. No species had ever destroyed an entire Krex patrol squadron. Most enemies surrendered after losing a single ship. These humans fight like us, his tactical officer observed. Their weapons are designed to destroy heavily defended targets. They show no fear of superior numbers. Thakmor studied the combat recordings from the battle. The human ship had moved with precise coordination, its crew working as a single deadly unit. Most disturbing, the humans seemed to expect their enemies to be as dangerous as they were. They come from a death world, Thakmor realized. Their entire species has been shaped by constant warfare. They know no other way to live. This was something the Krex Empire had never encountered. Every species they had conquered lived on peaceful worlds where conflict was rare. When faced with overwhelming force, they quickly surrendered to avoid casualties. But humans had evolved on a planet where everything tried to kill them, including other humans. The psychological effect on Krek's forces was devastating. They had built their entire empire on the assumption that conquered species would remain passive and afraid. When their own prisoners turned against them, using captured weapons and human tactics, the Krek's military structure began to collapse. Supreme War Leader Grakthul, commanding from his flagship Dark Conquest, watched his empire crumble in real time. Reports flooded in from across Krek's space. Slave revolts on hundreds of worlds, supply lines cut by human-trained guerrilla forces, and entire star systems declaring independence. How did this happen? He demanded of his tactical staff. How did a handful of primitive aliens destroy everything we built? His intelligence officer, studying captured human military doctrine, provided the answer. War Leader, these humans come from a world where everything tries to kill them. They have spent their entire history learning to fight against impossible odds. When they taught our slaves to fight, they gave them something we never expected: hope. The end came not with a single decisive battle, but with a cascade of surrenders as Krek's commanders realized their empire was finished. The species that had built their power on fear discovered that humans had taught their victims something more powerful: courage. When the orbital defenses of Nexar Prime finally fell, Morrison led the liberation forces to the surface. The sight that greeted them was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Millions of beings from hundreds of species, freed from years or decades of slavery, looked up at their liberators with tears of joy. Professor Kethran, now wearing the uniform of a coalition officer, stood beside Morrison as they surveyed the liberated processing facilities. "Captain, my people have a saying. Knowledge without action is worthless, but action without knowledge is dangerous. You humans have taught us that sometimes the most important knowledge is knowing when to fight." The ceremony that followed took place on the captured Krek's flagship, now renamed UNS Liberation. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered to witness the formal surrender of the remaining Krek's forces. Supreme War Leader Grakthul, stripped of his armor and weapons, faced Morrison across a table covered with surrender documents. "You have destroyed everything my people built over centuries," he said bitterly. Morrison looked at the defeated Krek's commander without hatred. "Your people built an empire on slavery and murder. We just gave your victims the tools to tear it down." The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of Krek's expansion for generations watched as the mighty empire formally surrendered to a coalition led by humans from a small blue planet. Syalandra of the Zephyrians, now serving as the first ambassador of the reformed Galactic Defense Coalition, floated beside Morrison as they watched the ceremony. "Captain, when we called for peacekeepers, we never imagined this would be the result." Morrison smiled at the gentle alien who had started this entire adventure. "Sometimes the only way to keep the peace is to be ready for war. Your people asked for help, and we gave you the best help we know how to give." As the human fleet prepared for its journey home to Earth, Morrison reflected on what they had accomplished. They had come to resolve a minor territorial dispute and ended up liberating half the galaxy. But more importantly, they had taught peaceful species that evil could be defeated if good people were willing to fight for what was right. The final message Morrison sent to Earth was simple: mission accomplished. The galaxy is free, and they know they can count on humanity to help keep it that way. Behind them, across hundreds of worlds, former slaves were learning to live as free beings again. And if new threats ever emerged, they would remember the lessons taught by the Peacekeepers from the death world called Earth. Kethran straightened his thin shoulders. "Perhaps not, but we have something the Kreks fear more than weapons. We have knowledge. We know the location of every Kreks installation, every supply depot, every weakness in their empire." Within weeks, Sergeant Rodriguez was running training camps on liberated worlds, teaching former slaves how to use captured Kreks weapons and basic infantry tactics. The sight of gentle scholars and peaceful farmers learning to handle assault rifles would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The key is not to fight like humans, Rodriguez explained to a group of mixed alien recruits. Fight like yourselves, but with human tactics. Use your natural advantages. The Zephyrians, with their ability to float and move in 3 dimensions, became excellent scouts and infiltrators. The plant-like Verdani, rooted but capable of growing rapidly, created perfect defensive positions and supply networks. Even the crystal beings called Lumura proved useful, their ability to communicate through light, making them ideal for coordinating attacks across vast distances. Captain Morrison watched the transformation with amazement. Species that had known only peace for centuries were learning the brutal art of warfare with desperate determination. The Krex Empire had created its own worst enemy by showing these gentle beings what true evil looked like. The decisive moment came when long-range scouts reported massive Krex reinforcements heading toward the core systems, where the Galactic Peace Council maintained their headquarters. Supreme War Leader Grakthul, the highest-ranking Krex commander, was bringing the Empire's most powerful weapons to crush the rebellion once and for all. Intelligence reports indicate they're planning to use planet-killer weapons, reported Communications Officer Chen. They want to destroy entire worlds as examples to discourage further resistance. Morrison studied the tactical reports with his expanded command staff. Major Lisa Thompson, his new strategic planner, had arrived with reinforcements from Earth. Commander Paul Anderson coordinated logistics for the growing coalition fleet. The mission that had started with 30 human ships now involved hundreds of vessels from dozens of species. They're making the same mistake they always make, observed Lieutenant Commander Hayes. They think overwhelming force will make everyone surrender. Morrison nodded. They still don't understand that we're not fighting to win territory. We're fighting for survival. People fight differently when they have nothing left to lose. The final battle took place at Nexar Prime, the fortress world where the Krex Empire maintained its largest slave processing facilities. Millions of captured beings from across the galaxy were held there, awaiting conversion into biological components for Krex industrial processes. The Krex defense was everything their empire could muster. Thousands of warships protected the fortress world, including the massive World Render and 3 other planet-killer dreadnoughts. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons designed to destroy entire fleets. Morrison's coalition fleet approached the system using tactics developed over months of fighting. Human ships led the assault while alien vessels provided specialized support. Zephyrian scouts mapped enemy positions, Verdani supply ships kept the fleet operational, and Mentari computer specialists worked to break Krex communication codes. "This is it," Morrison announced to his fleet. "Everything we fought for comes down to this battle. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every being the Krex have enslaved, and every world they plan to destroy." The battle began with human ships doing what they did best, appearing where the enemy least expected them. Commander Foster's Relentless led a squadron of destroyers through an asteroid field, emerging behind the Krex defensive line to attack their command ships. Captain Johnson's frigate Ranger coordinated with Zephyrian scouts to identify weak points in the orbital defenses. When his modified fusion torpedoes struck the defense platforms, secondary explosions lit up space like new stars. But the real breakthrough came when Marine boarding parties, led by Sergeant Mendez, captured a Krex communication center on one of the orbital stations. Engineer Kate Sullivan worked with alien technical specialists to turn the Krex's own systems against them. "We're broadcasting liberation frequencies to every slave facility on the planet," Sullivan reported. "The prisoners are breaking out of their holding cells." Across Nexar Prime, millions of enslaved beings rose in coordinated revolt. They had been waiting for this moment, and the arrival of the Liberation Fleet gave them the courage to fight back against their oppressors. The numbers that came back made Morrison's blood run cold. Each of the huge Krex ships carried more firepower than his entire task force combined. The smaller ships swarming through the system numbered in the thousands. Worst of all, The communications his officers intercepted from the Krex forces made their intentions clear. "They're talking about harvesting the remaining population," Chen reported, his face pale, "and something about processing facilities for biological materials." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the situation. The peaceful aliens had asked for help with what they thought was a minor territorial dispute. Instead, his small force of peacekeepers had stumbled into a war against an empire that made the worst human dictators look like children. On the screen, Silandra looked as confused as ever. "As you can see, the Krex presence is quite disturbing to the natural order. We hope your peacekeeping methods can convince them to restore harmony to these worlds." "Silandra," Morrison said carefully, "how long have the Krex been here?" "Oh, perhaps 2 of your months. They arrived and immediately began their loud, unpleasant activities. Most inconsiderate of them." Hayes pulled up long-range scans of the planets below. "Captain, I'm reading massive industrial operations on all 3 worlds. Strip mining, heavy construction, and what looked like processing centers for organic materials." Morrison realized that the peaceful aliens had no concept of the scale of horror they were dealing with. To them, genocide and planetary destruction were just disturbing and unpleasant. They had called for peacekeepers to handle what was actually a war against an empire that made the worst human conflicts look small. Far below in the system, aboard the massive Krex flagship Bone Crusher, War Master Thakmor noticed the new arrivals on his long-range sensors. The human ships appeared on his tactical display as tiny dots next to the marker for the Zephyrian vessel. "Another weak species comes to plead for mercy," he growled to his tactical officer. "Their ships are pathetically small, primitive kinetic weapons, and basic energy shields." Thakmor had conquered 17 star systems for the Krex Empire. Every species he encountered followed the same pattern. They sent diplomats and negotiators who begged for peace, then surrendered quickly when faced with superior firepower. These new arrivals would be no different. "Shall we destroy them immediately, War Master?" asked his weapons officer. "No," Thakmor decided. "Let them see what has become of the worlds they hope to save. Fear will make them more cooperative when we harvest their home system." Back on the Guardian's bridge, Morrison faced the most difficult decision of his military career. His small force was completely outgunned and facing an enemy that seemed to specialize in planetary destruction. The smart move would be to retreat immediately and report back to Earth. But the intercepts from Krex communications made it clear that billions of innocent beings were suffering and dying in this system. The peaceful aliens who had called for help had no idea what real warfare looked like, but they were still counting on human peacekeepers to somehow fix this situation. Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Hayes met his eyes and nodded slightly. Chen's jaw was set with determination. Even from the Marine section, he could hear Sergeant Mendez quietly preparing his troops for whatever came next. "Danny, send a message back to Earth," Morrison ordered. "Full tactical report on what we found here. Make it clear that we're facing a genocidal empire, not a border dispute." "What are our orders, Captain?" Hayes asked quietly. Morrison studied the tactical display showing the massive Krex fleet and the burning worlds below. Every logical calculation said they should run. But logic had never stopped human peacekeepers from trying to protect innocent people before. "We're going to do our job," Morrison said. "We came here to keep the peace and protect civilians. The situation is bigger than we expected, but the mission hasn't changed." Silandra's image on the screen brightened with hope. "Then you will be able to restore harmony to these disturbed worlds." Morrison looked at the alien's innocent, trusting face and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We're going to try, Silandra. We're going to try." Captain Morrison knew his small force could not win a direct fight against the massive Krex fleet. But retreat was not an option with billions of innocent lives at stake. He called his senior officers to an emergency meeting in the Guardian's conference room. Back on the Guardian, Morrison analyzed the battle reports with growing hope. The Krex were powerful but predictable. They relied on overwhelming firepower and expected their enemies to break under pressure. They had no experience fighting opponents who became more dangerous when cornered. Their tactics are designed for fighting peaceful species, Hayes observed. They don't know how to handle enemies who shoot back effectively. Engineer Sullivan was already working on improvements to their weapons. Sir, if we modify our fusion warheads and increase the railgun firing rate, we can take out even their big ships. Morrison nodded. Do it. And start working on boarding procedures. If we can capture one of their ships intact, we might learn something useful about their empire. The opportunity came 2 days later when a damaged Krex command cruiser fell behind its formation. Morrison ordered a full assault, with Marine boarding parties led by Sergeant Mendez preparing to take the ship. The Marines had trained for combat against human opponents wearing powered armor. They expected enemies who were fast, smart, and heavily armed. What they found instead were Krex soldiers who had evolved on a low-gravity world and had never fought anyone who fought back effectively. This is like fighting children, reported Corporal Amy Chen as her squad swept through the Krex ship's corridors. Their armor is barely stronger than our training gear. Sergeant Mendez coordinated the boarding operation with professional efficiency. His Marines moved through the alien ship like they owned it, overwhelming Krex defenders who had never experienced close-quarters combat against determined enemies. Within an hour, the Krex cruiser was under human control. Communications officer Danny Chen worked to break into the ship's computer systems, while intelligence specialist Tony Rodriguez interrogated the surviving Krex crew members. What they discovered changed everything. The captured data revealed the true scope of the Krex Empire. Hundreds of conquered worlds, billions of enslaved beings, and systematic plans to strip mine entire star systems. The minor territorial dispute was actually a galaxy-wide campaign of genocide. Captain, Rodriguez reported, this isn't just about a few border worlds. The Krex have been doing this for centuries. They're planning to expand into what they call the core sectors next. Morrison studied the intelligence reports with growing anger. The peaceful aliens of the Galactic Council had no idea they were facing an empire built on slavery and planetary destruction. They thought meditation and diplomacy could solve what was actually an existential threat to all civilized life. How many ships does the Krex Empire have? Morrison asked. Rodriguez consulted the captured data. Thousands, sir. This fleet is just one small part of their military. But the good news is they're spread thin across dozens of systems. Morrison realized that his small force had stumbled into something much bigger than a peacekeeping mission. The human task force was now the only thing standing between the Krex Empire and the complete conquest of this entire region of space. On the Guardian's bridge, Sylandra appeared on the communication screen with her usual confused expression. Captain Morrison, we detected some disturbances in the harmony fields. Are you making progress in restoring peace? Morrison looked at the gentle alien and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The Zephyrians and their allies had called for peacekeepers, but what they really needed were warriors. Fortunately, humanity had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to keep the peace was to be prepared for war. We're making progress, Sylandra, Morrison replied. But this is going to take longer than we originally planned. As the human task force prepared for the next phase of their mission, Morrison knew they were fighting for more than just the Andros system. They were fighting to protect a way of life that valued peace and harmony over conquest and destruction. It was exactly the kind of fight that human peacekeepers had trained their entire lives to win. War Master Thakmort was furious. In 3 centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever destroyed an entire Krex patrol and captured one of their ships. The humans had done both in less than a week. Now he faced a choice that went against every instinct he had developed during his rise through the Krex military ranks. What they learned was both hopeful and horrifying. The Krex Empire was vast but stretched thin. Most of their ships were scattered across hundreds of conquered worlds, maintaining control through fear rather than actual military presence. But they were also preparing a massive offensive against what they called the core worlds, where the peaceful aliens lived. Captain Chen reported, they're planning to attack the Galactic Council's home systems within the next month. They want to destroy the center of galactic civilization before anyone else can organize resistance. Morrison realized that his mission had changed completely. They were no longer peacekeepers trying to resolve a local dispute. They had become the front line of defense for an entire civilization. The human task force began operating with new purpose. Instead of just harassing the Krek's fleet, they started targeting key command ships and communication relays. Each successful attack disrupted Krek's coordination across multiple star systems. Commander Foster's destroyer Relentless became famous among both human and Krek's forces for its daring attacks. In one engagement, Foster led his ship directly through a Krek's formation, launching missiles at point-blank range before spinning away into an asteroid field. "These humans fight like demons," reported one surviving Krek's officer. "They show no fear of death, and they never retreat even when outnumbered." The psychological impact on Krek's forces was severe. For centuries, they had conquered species that surrendered quickly when faced with superior firepower. The humans not only refused to surrender, they became more dangerous when cornered. War Master Thakmor found himself facing a crisis unlike anything in Krek's military history. His massive fleet was being slowly destroyed by an enemy force a fraction of its size. Worse, reports were coming in from other systems where local populations had started fighting back, inspired by news of human resistance. "The humans have shown other species that we can be beaten," his intelligence officer reported. "Slave revolts are breaking out on 17 worlds." Thakmor realized that the humans represented more than just a military threat. They were proving that the Krek's empire could be challenged, and that example was spreading across the galaxy. On the 6th day of battle, Morrison received an unexpected message. It came not from Earth or the Galactic Council, but from the liberated populations of worlds the humans had helped free from Krek's control. "Captain Morrison," the message began, "we are the freed peoples of Nexar Prime. Your warriors have given us hope and weapons to fight our oppressors. We stand ready to join your battle against the Krek's empire." Similar messages arrived from dozens of other worlds. Species that had been enslaved for decades were rising up, using captured Krek's weapons and human tactical advice to fight their oppressors. Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They had come to this system as peacekeepers on what they thought was a simple mission. Now they found themselves leading a galaxy-wide revolution against tyranny. "Sir," Hayes reported, "long-range sensors are detecting massive explosions in the outer system. It looks like the Kreks are retreating." Morrison felt a moment of satisfaction, but he knew the real war was just beginning. The humans had proved that the Kreks could be beaten, but the Empire was vast and would not give up easily. Silandra appeared on the communication screen, her usual confusion replaced by something like awe. "Captain Morrison, the harmony disruptions are spreading across multiple star systems. We are detecting what our sensors call liberation events on dozens of worlds." Morrison smiled at the gentle alien. "That's not disruption, Silandra. That's the sound of freedom spreading across the galaxy." The liberation of the Andra system was just the beginning. As news of human victories spread across the galaxy, Morrison found himself commanding not just his original task force, but a growing fleet of liberated worlds and refugee populations eager to fight back against their oppressors. The first to join were the survivors from Nexar Prime, the scholarly species that had been enslaved by the Kreks. Their leader, a gray-skinned academic named Professor Kethran, approached Morrison with an unusual request. "Captain, my people have studied warfare in our libraries for centuries, but we never practiced it. Will your Marines teach us to fight?" Gunnery Sergeant Mendez looked at the frail, elderly alien and scratched his head. "Professor, no offense, but your people don't look built for combat. Deploy the entire fleet," he ordered his tactical staff aboard the massive flagship Bone Crusher. "I want every ship we have surrounding these humans. We will crush them so completely that no other species will dare resist us. His second-in-command, Sub-Leader Grakval, studied the deployment orders with concern. War Master, that will leave our conquered worlds undefended. What if other species see this as weakness? Thakmor's eyes glowed red with anger. These humans have made us look weak already. We must destroy them quickly and completely, or our entire empire will face rebellion. The response was massive. 300 Krex vessels, including the fortress ship World Render, moved to surround Morrison's tiny task force. It was the largest military deployment in Krex history, all focused on destroying 30 human ships. Captain Morrison watched the enemy fleet positioning on his tactical displays. The numbers were overwhelming, but he felt strangely calm. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that human military doctrine was designed for. "They're trying to surround us," observed Lieutenant Commander Hayes. "Classic hammer and anvil formation." Morrison smiled grimly. "They still think we're going to fight like their previous enemies. Time to show them how humans handle impossible odds." The human response was not what the Krex expected. Instead of forming a defensive formation and waiting for the attack, Morrison's ships scattered in all directions. Each destroyer and frigate became an independent hunter, using speed and stealth to avoid the massive Krex fleet. Commander Amy Scott took her destroyer UNS Defiant deep into the asteroid belt surrounding Nexar Prime. Her crew had trained for this kind of warfare in the dangerous asteroid fields around Jupiter. Moving between the floating rocks, they became invisible to Krex sensors. Captain Ray Johnson led his frigate UNS Ranger toward the system's outer edge, where a nebula provided cover from enemy detection. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Sam Parker, prepared their modified fusion torpedoes for long-range strikes against Krex supply ships. The Battle of Andros became a running fight that lasted 6 days. Human ships appeared without warning to strike isolated Krex squadrons, then vanished before the main fleet could respond. Supply convoys, communication relays, and repair stations all became targets for human hit-and-run attacks. Each engagement taught the humans more about their enemies. The Krex were powerful but inflexible. Their tactics assumed enemies would mass together for a single decisive battle. They had no experience with opponents who treated warfare as a deadly game of hide-and-seek. On the third day, Marine boarding parties led by Gunnery Sergeant Mendez captured a Krex supply ship loaded with intelligence data. The information they found was both encouraging and terrifying. "The good news is they're not as strong as they look," reported Intelligence Officer Tony Rodriguez. "Most of their ships are old and poorly maintained. They've gotten lazy from fighting enemies who don't fight back." Morrison studied the captured battle plans. "What's the bad news? They have reinforcements coming from 12 other star systems. And sir, the data shows this is just a small part of their empire. They have thousands more ships spread across dozens of sectors." The revelation changed Morrison's understanding of the situation. The human task force was not just fighting for the Andros system. They were fighting the advance guard of an empire that planned to conquer the entire galaxy. The turning point came when Sergeant Mendez led a desperate boarding action against the Krex command cruiser Skullbreaker. The Marines fought their way through corridors filled with Krex warriors, using tactics developed for urban warfare on Earth. Human soldiers had learned to fight in 3 dimensions, using walls and ceilings as cover, while their enemies expected combat on level ground. The Krex, evolved on a low-gravity world, found themselves outmatched by humans who had grown up fighting Earth's higher gravity. "Breach and clear, just like training," Mendez called to his Marines as they swept through the alien ship. "Remember, these guys have never fought anyone who fights back." The Marines moved through the Krex vessel with practiced efficiency. Corporal Lisa Martinez used her demolitions expertise to blow through bulkheads, while Sergeant Mike Torres coordinated covering fire that kept the Krex defenders pinned down. When the fighting was over, the humans had captured not just another ship, but the Krex Regional Communication Center. Communications Officer Chen worked with the ship's computer systems to intercept messages from across the Krex Empire.